Oh,
Go for it now.
Okay.
Take over.
okay. Today's not September 18th, but it's close enough, I guess. So before I delve into the subject, I think it's worth talking about why I'm doing this talk at all. So first, about me. This is me as a first year. Very happy, much happier than me now. As you can see, you can actually see the light in my eyes. Now, I'm a soulless fifth year computer science graduate who's still hanging around for who knows why. But when I first came to Poly, I didn't know what I wanted to do in computer science. All I knew was I was learning how to program. And so eventually, because of inertia and whatnot, I ended up doing web dev. I did web dev with Amazon for 2 years, and then I realized I hate it. It was not something I could see myself doing long term, and so then I went, okay, what else is there, right? And so then I tried natural language processing and AI, because philosophically it sounded really interesting and rewarding. And then I hated it too. But at this time I was a third year and time was running out, and I was starting to panic because I was realizing, oh gosh, what do I do with my life? And that's when I started doing CPSec and exploring cybersecurity careers. And I found it really engaging and really wonderful. And today I'm actually going to, or not today, after college I'll actually be going into the cybersecurity industry as a security engineer for Datadog. But throughout this entire process, I was very confused and I was very uncertain of where to go or what cybersecurity even was. Like, I'd go up to recruiters at job fairs and I'd be like, I'm interested in cybersecurity. And then the people who actually knew what they were talking about would scoff at me and say, or not scoff, but they'd chuckle, They'd go like, hey, what kind of cybersecurity? It's a massive field. And then I'd be dumbfounded because I didn't know what to say. And so before I start, I want to get a survey of the room and really understand, so I'm not preaching to the choir. I'm assuming everybody here is at least somewhat interested in cybersecurity. But raise your hand if you're like, cybersecurity is the field for me. Like, 100% I will be going into cybersecurity as a profession. Okay, cool. Okay, great. How about like moderate to slight interest? Okay, great. That's wonderful. That's most of you. So my talk will not be in vain. And I guess raise your hand if you're very aware of like the sorts of cyber jobs or careers out there. Okay. And well, in that case, if then maybe my third question's a bit moot, just because I think the third one implies that you raise your hand for the second one, so I'll skip that one. But let's talk a bit about why you should do cybersecurity, or I should say why cybersecurity is even a viable field to begin with, right? Maybe I can, push you in the cybersecurity direction. So this is a wonderful quote from a very intelligent, probably smarter than me, Stanford PM intern I interned with this summer. She said, cybersecurity doesn't generate any revenue. It's interesting, but I refuse to go into the field because it's something that seems like we'll be the first to go if something bad happens. But the truth is that cybersecurity is important because it prevents loss of revenue and trust. When's the last time you heard about a data breach, right? I mean, there's tons of them, and they cost companies millions, billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in money, right? And so, is it a fad? Well, if a threat exists, security is necessary, right? I mean, why do banks have vaults? Why do, physical security exist still? And the truth is that security probably is not going to go away for quite a while. And it really is more important than ever. If you look at this photo here, you'll see a figure of a bunch of different large tech companies that basically rule your soul nowadays. But, they're still important. And they store terabytes of user data, some of your most personal secrets, your social security number. They also oversee the transaction of money, like a lot of money. And, big tech is joining the ranks of big tobacco, big pharma, big what have you. But the biggest issue is that internet and most of tech is not built for security, right? At the beginning, as Henry said a few weeks ago, like, the internet was like initially just ARPANET, right? It was like something that was designed to be research. It was designed to be functional and novel. It was not designed or thought to be the sort of massive mega scale it is today. And because of that, there's just an absolutely massive attack surface. And to make matters worse, there are no more,
Sorry, what is an attack surface?
So an attack surface is basically, you can think about attack surface as a potential sort of target or vector for attack. An attack surface is, you can think about it in TLDR form as a sort of opportunity for attack. I'm not sure if you want to elaborate on that at all.
No, that was great.
Okay, cool. And so to make matters worse, there really aren't any lone hackers or random people hacking into the CIA or NSA for fun, because security back then used to be more of a joke, right? Nowadays you've got an entire massive, catalogs of threat actors, and threat actors are, people that are acting threats. And so defenders, companies are at a massive disadvantage, right? You have people like the NSA, the CIA, the Chinese version, the Russian version, the Israeli version. Like all these massive intelligence agencies are trying to break into, let's say, Google to steal information or to control things, right? You also have talented hacker groups that may or may not also be sponsored by nation states that are trying to do the same thing, but maybe for money. And you also have kids running around doing the same thing with scripts, right? It's just absolute chaos. It's a zoo. And to compound on that, the modern tech stack is turtles all the way down. And by that, I mean, there's like this weird ancient saying that I found somewhat interesting. Is way back when they thought the world was flat, they hypothesized, or some wonderfully imaginative person hypothesized that the world rested upon the back of a turtle. But then somebody asked, okay, but what's that turtle like standing on? Another turtle. Okay, what about that turtle? And it just ends up being turtles all the way down. And unfortunately, something very similar can be said for the modern tech stack, because when you think about it, right, when you think about, let's say, your modern web app run in JavaScript using Angular framework or React or something like that, you've got this, sort of program that is very abstracted and very complicated and runs on a bunch of different dependencies. And those dependencies are dependent on a bunch of other dependencies, and eventually you get to a server, and that server is dependent on a bunch of client things, right? Or not client things, network things, and then those network things are dependent on physical hardware, and you have this massive stack, and at every single layer, it can be compromised, it can be broken. And even if one of them is broken, bad things happen. And because of this massive scope of things that can go wrong, there are a lot of different cybersecurity opportunities. And so, since I've established why cybersecurity is even a viable career to begin with, what's special about it? What makes it interesting? How's it different from software engineering? Well, first, I'd say that the work is, to some people, can be very meaningful. And that is not to say that normal software engineering can't be meaningful, but oftentimes you could potentially be, in a situation where you're working on, let's say, a web app or something like that, that, might be very meaningful to a company, but you could care less about invoices or transactions or, what have you. And the thing about cybersecurity is, as a security person, your decisions hold high stakes and responsibilities, and they are impactful across many domains. And at the same time, it's typically very interdisciplinary, right? You could be in a position where you do cybersecurity work, but it could intersect with law. It could intersect with ethics. It could intersect with even government work, right? Like how you're storing data, how you're handling customer requests to delete data, right? That sort of thing. And at the same time, it's a very unique field in terms of what you do, because we talk about this thing called the adversarial mindset that's very important in cybersecurity, but basically it's the idea that you, as a professional, are actually thinking actively about how to break things. And it's not something that is, it's something very disruptive, and it's something that conventionally is not very sort of accepted in a lot of other fields, right? Like, try going to finance and saying, I want to game the stock market and see how far that takes you before you're thrown into jail, right? There's a sort of opportunity to be a bit more impish, to be a bit more creative in a sort of way that is typically not allowed. And at the same time, you learn a lot, right? Like what is good, what is accepted as secure practices or effective practices might change in cybersecurity in a matter of months, right? It's a very fluid field. It's very much about cat and mouse. It's very much about attacking and responding to attacks. And in this sort of field, you will have slower days, you'll have quieter days, but it won't be the sort of constant 9-to-5 grind that you might find in other jobs. And by constant grind, I mean like, I guess, just the same thing every day, yes. And yeah, there's a lot of novelty in that. And of course, this might lead to other sort of things they have to worry about, right, like burnout and whatnot, but I think it's really interesting. But now that I've talked about some reasons why you might consider cybersecurity, let's talk a bit more concretely about entry-level jobs. And before I start with this section, I should preface this with a bunch of stars or asterisks that say a lot of disclaimers. First, these are not all the jobs in the market. This is just a very general overview of what you can possibly expect in terms of jobs. And secondly, jobs nowadays aren't that well defined, right? You might have one company call a security engineer something that does like all these sorts of things, and then another company calls it a security engineer, and it does like a bunch of other things, right? I mean, they can vary, they can overlap, but these are the sort of classifications I'll use in order to sort of make sense of a somewhat jumbled industry sometimes. Okay, so first off, let's talk about security engineering. These are what I will classify as a blend of software engineering and security. In the same way, have you all heard of like full stack web development? It's like the idea that basically you as a software developer own this entire stack, right? And that includes in terms of like a website, the front end, the back end, the server, the deployment, right? All these sorts of things. You just own the whole darn thing, right? And with security engineering, it's like that, except instead of focusing on the functionality of, let's say, a service or a product, you own the security of that thing, right? And so in that case, it's full stack, because even though you might be focused on one product, and it could be something like an internal thing, like the corporate network, right, or corporate devices, or it could be something external facing, right, like a product, cyber-physical one, maybe like a Tesla, right, or some sort of hardware, or a phone or something like that, right, or it could be software apps, right, like a web app, an iOS app, anything of that nature. But the goal of a security engineer is to design and implement security architecture in order to protect that product or that service, right? And in terms of impacts, it's really interesting because it's very multifaceted, and I'd say in terms of companies, security engineers have to do a bunch of things, right? They're not just relegated to defense or offense. Oftentimes they do a mix of things, right? They'll have to, when you talk about the full stack of an application, you have to monitor it, right? You have to secure it in terms of, you might have to pen test it in order to try and assess if it's secure. You also will have to work very closely with software engineers, sister teams, I suppose you could call it, where you will read their code and you might give them advice and say like, hey, don't do it this way, or hey, do it this way, because you own the security side of the product. And this is cool because you get to read code, you get to write code, and you get to do security. So you get to do all three. And the reason it's a purple slide is to emphasize the fact that there is a red side, the offensive side is often what we call red, and a blue side, a defensive side, and oftentimes it encompasses both. And the reason I say it's generalist and specialist is because, again, you sort of own the full stack, right? You own a wide swath of information, but you specialize in it. You say, it's mine, and I will not let bad things happen to it, hopefully. No guarantees. But next, we've got security analysts, and, well, they analyze data, but they also do more than that. And typically, at least in my experience, it's more like information technology or information security focused than software engineering. Basically, you see a lot more emphasis on the analysis part and less on the engineering part, in that you're auditing systems for vulnerabilities. You're proactively investigating for compromise. You're being very paranoid, you're performing risk assessments, or you might, analyze received emails to see if they're spam or phishing or dangerous, right? And you collect all these metrics and analyze your system. And I think this is the sort of part that analysts do a lot, is they read a lot of logs, at least in the past. And one of my friends like say like once we hit like the heap exploitation part, it was just like it's so difficult. I just want to like give up and do something else, right? There's a lot, but thankfully there are sort of answers and reasons to hope. Career ambiguity isn't necessarily a deal breaker, right? In the sense that in some ways that just means that if you're ambitious and you're creative and you do your best, oftentimes you get to blaze your own path. You don't need to conform to some sort of objective bar in order to be considered, right? And experience isn't the only thing that matters, although it is weighed nicely. Companies also value things like demonstration of interest, right? Like if you go to a recruiter, they care about, if you say you're interested in cybersecurity, they'll probably ask, well, how do I know that you're interested, right? Well, they won't say that because that's a bit confrontational, but that's what they're thinking in their head, probably. And, also things like transferable skills, right? Even though it might not be directly related to cybersecurity, like things, skills like being able to learn quickly, things like being curious, right? Things like being willing to adapt and improve and respond to feedback. These are all transferable skills that companies really value. At the end of the day, for entry-level positions, companies aren't interested in just your experience. They're also very interested in your growth potential. And it also doesn't need to be overwhelming, even though it feels like it can be. I guess that's why CPSIC is here. Take one step at a time and don't be afraid to ask questions. If there are fields that you're interested in, areas where you feel like you want to look into but you don't know where to start, definitely, ask. And it is a journey, but we are rooting for you. And so in terms of practical steps to take, this is a really important one, but it's really to put max effort into core classes. Things like data structures, things like systems programming, OS. These sorts of things seem like they're just software, but they have a very heavy foundational weight in cybersecurity because you can't do proper security without the knowledge behind it, right? Like you can't figure out how to break something unless you figure out how it ticks, right? And so this sort of foundation is very important. And after you sort of establish that sort of foundation, take, data structures, systems, programming. Well, I guess you have to take the security classes, but after you do that, take some security classes. I'm pretty sure, go to the CSC catalog, Control F security. I mean, the initial one, the most sort of prerequisite to most of them is 321, right? Intro to Computer Security. And after that, I mean, there's a whole bunch of cool security classes. You've got binary exploitation, you've got network security, you've got, the other ones are, there's like IoT security maybe.
Hardware security.
Wireless security. I mean, you've got a lot of cool security classes. You even have like cryptography. I think Peterson teaches that. I mean, you've got a lot of cool like things, right? And so definitely take some security classes. And if you want to demonstrate interest and learn transferable skills, come to CTFs. Like CTFs are really cool because you learn a lot, but it's also gamified, and it's it's formatted in such a way where you feel like even if it's a simple problem, when you solve it, you feel that sort of sense of accomplishment, right? You feel like you've done something cool, and you have, because you've learned something when you solve a problem. And also, like, try starting your career journey earlier. You don't necessarily have to immediately start applying for internships, but I think a good initial step is really just to look at job postings for, let's say, internships or entry-level positions, and to look at the sort of things that they value, right? To look at the skills, to look at the qualifications, and to say, okay, well, these are things that, this position values, and maybe this is a position that I might be interested in the future. Maybe I can start, learning just a bit about it every day, right? Developing those skills, potentially doing your own projects is important. And also, like, networking is really important as well, right? I'd say, like most people really underestimate the value of networking. You know, reaching out to people who you know potentially, or meeting people in the cybersecurity industry, maybe at conferences, or maybe at, you know, just to the career fair and places like that, right? And talking to them and being a personable person or affable person. And, you know, networking opportunities really help, right? And, you know, when you feel like you're ready, finding internships is great. And internships don't even have to be related to security, right? It could just be a software internship. Because, you know, transferable skills are very important, right? And, you know, at the end of the day, security is still software. And, you know, any sort of internship is great. And don't forget to have fun, because cybersecurity, as I said before, is a very fast-paced, fast-moving field. And if you're just grinding it to get an internship, if you're just grinding it to get a job, you will burn out so quickly. You know, part of the reason cybersecurity jobs are, you know, always open, as I heard from an Amazon manager once, it's not just because they can't find qualified people, it's because the qualified people say, screw this, I'm out, right? And so, you know, finding that sort of balance between learning and still enjoying the subjects, in my opinion, is very crucial to it. But that is basically all I had for today. One thing though, was when I was talking to Henry mentioned that there might be a potential future or maybe even current internship opportunity here at Cal Poly, in that I actually didn't even know about this, but apparently Cal Poly has a SOC, a Security Operations Center, that has junior security analyst positions where you can do things like modify security alerts to make them more helpful, and vet emails, and also work with Splunk. I'm not sure if you all have heard of Splunk, but it's a really cool sort of tool that works with logs and aggregating and manipulating logs in a very helpful way. And so they've got Splunk certifications, and it's part-time with flexible hours. But Henry said they hire when they feel like it. So I'm not sure if they're feeling like it right now or if they will in the future, but definitely keep an eye out. And I'm sure Henry has more information on that if you want to talk to him afterwards. I'm sure that he can connect you to the right people. But yeah, that's basically my talk, and look at that. I didn't go over. I'm so glad. Anyways, I hope it was helpful, and please don't hesitate to send me email or ask me any questions. Anyways, that's it. Anyone have questions? Great. Wonderful.